Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to see you again after a busy day, no doubt. How are you all tonight? All wide awake, some looking a bit weary, but most looking pretty good tonight. That's great. All show, is it, Bill? All right. Tonight we come to the theme, how to go about discipling and mentoring. We want to get down into some of the practical areas now of what we've been looking at over the past few weeks. And I'm going to introduce just the first part of tonight, then Diane's going to take the major part as she shares, especially in the mentoring area. But first, just let me tell you a little story about two pastors' kids who were arguing one day. One of the pastor's kids got up and said, "My father is a well-known preacher. He can preach without notes." The other boy got up and said, "Is that right?" "Yes." "Well, my father is not a well-known preacher, but he is a powerful preacher. Sometimes he can preach without notes, and sometimes he can preach without thinking." Now, I don't know where I stand tonight, whether I'm going to share with you without notes or whether I'm going to share without thinking, but I hope you've at least got notes to go on. I've got some notes to go on, and I hope what we share tonight will be very thought-provoking, and I know it's come out of a lot of experience and practical ministry over many years, so we're not sharing from the textbook. We want to share with you some very practical areas of how to impact others as we look at this topic of how to go about mentoring. I just want to remind you, first of all, tonight what we introduced last week about the different types of mentoring, and we had that little scale of the different styles of mentoring. And on the intensive end, we have discipling, and then progressively, as we move across, we go to spiritual guide, coaching, and less intensive styles of mentoring. These all come under the mentoring. And have we got that up on the slide? Yep, up in front of you there. So you can see the different types. Now, we have focused so far on the discipling end. Now, the discipling end is really teaching believers all that Jesus has commanded us, teaching them to obey. So it's instructional in its main focus, but it is relational too, as the discipler establishes a rapport with those that he or she is discipling. But as we move along that scale, we find that increasingly it becomes less instructional in following a curriculum or a plan of topical areas, and becomes more sharing life and relational. And Diane's going to particularly pick up in that area tonight and just tell you from her own mentoring experience some things that I hope will be an encouragement to you. But first I want to start with this thought that discipling begins at home, especially for those of you who have family responsibilities and young children at home. It's great to be able to impact others out there, people that we can come alongside and encourage. But I want to begin right where I believe our Christian ministry does and should begin, is right at home base. Those of you who are older have gone through that phase of child rearing and parental responsibility, and so you're in a different phase now where you can come alongside others quite freely and out of your experience and growth as a Christian now, encourage others, whether inside your family or outside your family. But I want to just focus initially on this area, the beginning point, especially for those with children still under your care. Because we can make the mistake of rushing out to minister to others and be busy about helping other people on the journey and neglect the most obvious area, right at home base. Now, I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in a pastor's home. I know the incredible pressure that pastors have in caring for the wider family, a church family. And I know the struggles my own dad had with 5 children at home having the time to give to us as kids. And I know some of my brothers and sisters felt that the work of the ministry often pulled my father out to help other people while they really were trying to get his attention. And sadly, even some in my own family don't follow the Lord today, and I sense it's probably because of that very area that they struggled with. And I've seen many examples of other pastors who have been so eager to run to the needs of other people that their own family have come apart. And that's tragic. But it doesn't have to be just pastors face that trouble. All of us can face that trouble because we're all busy people. We've all got commitments, work responsibilities, and demands of one kind or another. But before we take on another ministry or another area outside the home, we need to make sure that we're covering home base and doing what we can do at the stage that you might be at with your family if you're married, of making sure you are discipling your own kids, because that's the most important beginning place. And as I grew up and came into marriage and our 3 boys eventually were born, I made a resolve before God that my ministry began at home. And even though I was a missionary and then a pastor, and I had more than enough to do, and I was called to do all kinds of things, I made a commitment that we were going to lock in time, special times through the week that was family time, and that I was going to be there for my children. And so right from their early years, I wanted to be the spiritual head of the home. Diane shared in rearing the kids, but I made it a point that I didn't leave all the spiritual development to Diane, that I would at night time read Bible stories to the children, I would pray with them, I would be there for them on family activities and that sort of thing. And we tried to do our best to make sure that they knew that they were important in our ministry, that they were the start of our ministry. I just want to read to you Deuteronomy chapter 6 and some verses here. Verse 4 down to verse 9 of Deuteronomy 6. This is what these verses say. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. And so the very beginning point, of course, has to be your own walk with God, your own relationship with God, and your own love of God. The greatest commandment is summarized right here. Love God with all that is within you. Let him be first in your life. Put him as Lord and Master and King of your life. That's where it begins. But once your own relationship with God is established and growing, and you're cultivating that and walking with him, then we read these next important verses that flow out of that. Verse 7, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. In other words, as you love the Lord your God with all your heart, then you are out of your relationship with God to impress these same principles and values and teachings upon your children, so that they will see that your faith is real and genuine, that it's important to you, and that they can catch something of that same passion that you have for God. It's out of example, instruction, and modelling the life before your children that has the greatest impact. And so here, in every aspect of life, talking with your children while you're at home, in the activities of life, tying them as symbols on your hands in all that you do, your children are seeing that you are living a godly life and a godly example in your actions. Tying them over, as it were, between your eyes so that everything you see and think about relates to your relationship with God. And write them on the doorframes of your homes. Sometimes you go into a Christian home and they have a little plaque on the wall, Christ is the head of this home. the unseen guest at every meal, the silent listener to every conversation. It's a wonderful little plaque to have. It's more wonderful if it's true in the home, that home has the atmosphere of Christ and the children know you love and follow God. And so, simply tonight, we see here, and in Ephesians 6, which reminds us, especially the fathers, not to exasperate your children, but to bring them up and train them in the knowledge and love of the Lord. Ephesians 6 and verse 4 tells us that. And Proverbs 22:6 also tells us, if you train up a child in the way that he shall go, when he is old, he will not depart from them. Now, I know children will make their own choices, and no matter how good you are in fulfilling your God-given place as a parent, they can still go the wrong way. But if we as parents, at the stage where they're in the formative years of their life, do our best to set a godly example and to demonstrate what it means to live under Christ as King of our lives, and if we give our kids the time that they need, and the discipline, and the instruction, and the example, we won't need to live in the regret that if they do go wrong, it's because somehow we failed to do what we should have done. And so we disciple our children. Sometimes we've been talking about discipling as going through a little kind of series of studies. Well, discipling is broader than that, and with children at home, it's love and discipline, it's through instruction, and it's through example. Don't leave the Christian influence on your children to your church, to your youth group, to your Christian school, and think that it doesn't matter what happens at home as long as they get that Christian influence there. It doesn't happen like that. It has to come from the centre and work outwards. If the home is fulfilling that part and you are doing your part as a mother and a father in the godly influence on your children, then all those other things are reinforcing it. But you need that at the centre right from the beginning. Values are caught more than taught. You know, children copy what they see you do rather than what you tell them to do. I think what's most important in the home is a godly example. It's different to be, godliness is different to being religious. You know, you can be religious, but not godly. What's the difference? Godly comes out of being, your relationship with God, comes out of your love for God. Being religious means you do Christian things. You go to church, you might read your Bible sometimes, you might even say prayers with the kids, you might do Christian things, but if they don't see that God is important to you, that in your lifestyle, in your attitudes and values, that you are reflecting a Christ-likeness, despite your imperfections, it's not going to really stick. And so we're all human. I've fallen short in many areas in being a parent to my kids, but I just encourage you, those of you who have young families, to remember to begin there. Then for those of you who are older, don't live in the regret that maybe for various reasons you were not able to have that influence in your family, and maybe your kids may not even follow the Lord today. But pick up the pieces and say, I want my life to count for something now. If I can still have an influence on my growing up children, if that's what they are, well and good. But maybe there are some other young people now that you can come alongside who don't have a godly role model, and now out of the lessons of life, you have something that you can share with them. And so I want to encourage you at that level, no matter who you are, no matter what your journey has been to this point in time. So discipling begins at home. But now we want to move on and say, well, how do we have an influence beyond the home? Because once you work from the centre outwards, you don't just stay within the home environment, you have responsibilities in other areas. And so we want now to share with you how to become a mentor in wider areas of impacting others. And I'm going to invite Diane to come now and to share a little bit on that area of mentoring. Diane especially has done quite a lot of work in the mentoring people one-on-one. I have done less in that area. I've been more in the teaching, instructional side and training side, but I do have some young guys that I'm mentoring in a kind of very intermittent way, not a regular thing. But Diane has got many things to share, and often, it is the ladies that are best in this area because ladies, you have a wonderful gift of being much more relational than us guys. We tend to be much more work-orientated and focused on tasks rather than relationships. But you ladies can have a wonderful ministry in this area, but that's not to let men off the hook. I believe we also have a responsibility to get with younger men and really have an influence and to share in a relational context some of the wonderful things that God has been teaching us and wants to teach others through us. So I'm going to hand over to Diane now just to share a little bit on this area. Just put that here. Clip it on you there. There we go. You got a pocket?
Yep. Excuse us while we get ready here. As Ian has been sharing in the whole area of discipling starts at home, just before I go on to the actual mentoring area, which is a much broader area than discipling. Mentoring's the big word, the overall word. We learned that last week. Discipling is part of mentoring. But I'm going to share with you tonight the much broader aspect of mentoring one-on-one, okay? But before I do that, I just thought of an illustration, and in my little folder here, I've got lots of illustrations, and this is one to do with discipling in the home, and I think this would be really good to share with you. And though they're words from a son to a mother, it could just as well have been the son to the father. So, I'm not talking about this is just for mothers, not at all. It's just that I happen to come across this illustration. This is what an adult son wrote to his mother. Thanks for investing your time, your love, and your life into all of us as your children. Motherhood is the greatest form of discipleship and discipling that there is. And because you have spent over 20 years mentoring and discipling us, I really want to thank you for that. Thanks for your godly example to us, Mum. And thanks for giving us all the opportunity in the world to reach our potential in God because of the way you've raised us. Now, I would say that all of us here, whether we're married or not, would love to receive that from one of our children. Wouldn't we be encouraged that we'd done just something right in that very difficult situation of bringing up children? But let me also say, as Ian said before, and as I've been reading a lot on mentoring and discipling, we're not disqualified just because we didn't get it right back there. And I think we've got to realise that the enemy would like us to think, well, if we fail there with our children or whatever, well, there's no hope for us now. Absolutely wrong. Because this is a new day, it's a new day in God, and as we grow in Him, there's such possibility for us to continue to impact other lives one-on-one or in groups. Such possibility. So I encourage you, I don't know a lot about most of you. Some of us have a lot of regrets in our past, and I particularly encourage you, if you do live with a lot of regrets in the way that perhaps you haven't discipled and mentored your own children, that's not the end of the story. That's not the end of the story. And as I often say to my mentorees, in God, anything is possible, anything. It's a matter of us getting into relationship with Him and trusting Him and letting Him by His Holy Spirit flow through us and make a difference in somebody else's life. So I encourage you in that area. You may turn to, I think it's page 15, how to go about discipling and mentoring, and soon I will just get you to fill in those little gaps there. Are you with me on page 15? Well, I'll just share that briefly with you soon, and David will kindly put it up on the overhead, but after a wee bit. Let me just say this to you as I share some of the things on mentoring. First of all, I was reading something of John Mallinson. This is one of the books, good books. If you're interested in mentoring, you will only hear a teeny little bit tonight. If you're interested in mentoring, you've got to get hold of some of these books. John Mallinson is an expert in mentoring to develop disciples and leaders. That's John Mallinson. And he's even got videos and CDs out, 30 hours seminar on mentoring. Well, I've got half an hour tonight. So do you understand? I'm just going to scratch the surface, and I hope, whet your appetite, that you will pick up some of these books if you're really fair dinkum about mentoring. And if you want to at some other point, even ringing or whatever, contact me or Ian, that's fine too. Sometimes, people just find it helpful to talk to someone who's perhaps done a little bit, and I have done a little bit of mentoring over the many years. The other book which I have been reading, I haven't read John Mallison's book, but I understand it's very good. But I have read a lot of Howard and William Hendricks. That's a father and son combination, which I think is really cool, having a father and son. A father who must be, by the look of his photo, I reckon he'd be in his 70s, and the son, whatever, 40. But these two have such a passion for mentoring that together they've written this book on mentoring, and it's called As Iron Sharpens Iron. As Iron Sharpens Iron. And if you actually buy the book, you'll think, oh, Diane didn't tell us this is men writing to men. Yes, that's true. I'm telling you right now. But there's a reason for that. There was a Promise Keepers conference, and out of it, this father and son really felt to write all that they had experienced in mentoring themselves in a book to really help men, older men, mentor younger men. And so that's why it's to men. But as he says in the beginning, it's for anyone. And I've read it. It's the most helpful book I have ever read on mentoring, and I've only read it in the last week. So most of what I share with you is from my own personal experience, but as I have read this, I have been so rapt that God is so gracious, because He's taught me things over the years that I've just picked up little bits and pieces. And when I read this in the last week, it's all there and much more. And I'm so thankful to God that He leads us into impacting other lives. And sometimes I've thought, goodness, I don't know, I hope I'm doing this right. And then I pick up a book like that, a father and son with so much experience, and they do it just the same. It's just that they have a wealth of knowledge here. So I recommend either of those books. I guess it goes without saying that mentoring is an absolute passion of mine. I love discipling in the instructional way. I've led different groups over the time, and I love that. You get into the Word of God and really encourage people to really get into the Word, to know the Word and to know God in a much more intimate way. And I love doing that. But mentoring, as I say, is more that one-on-one, getting alongside a person and encouraging them and helping them along life's pathway. And that's what I especially love and have done quite a bit over the years, and even at the moment am mentoring quite a few young women. And I count it an absolute privilege. And I would encourage you and continue to encourage you that if you can make a difference in the life of one other person, someone who's just a bit younger than you, less experienced than you in life's journey, what a difference I am sure it would make in your own life to know that God can use you to impact one other person. And as you do that and step out in faith, God will bring other people along as you have opportunity. I mean, some of us would be flat out mentoring one other person because of our commitments, but I encourage you to ask God to give you one other person, a younger person than yourself, less experience in life's journey, and ask God for that person that you could make a difference in their life. And I can assure you, and I've said this before, I have never been as fulfilled and satisfied in ministering and impacting other lives as in the whole area of discipling and mentoring. And I've done a whole lot of other things in my lifetime, in my Christian life. And of course, you probably realise too, mentoring isn't strictly for Christians, but just think, if mentoring in the world can have such an impact on other people, and it's everywhere today, you know, sports people have their mentors, Hollywood stars have their mentors, you name it, everyone's got mentors today, but it has been said, sadly, they're lacking in the church. I mean, you sort of think, well, wouldn't you think we'd get a hold of it? Because we can do Christian mentoring, and think of the power of that. As God gets a hold of us in a new way, and we are able to instill into the lives of someone younger all these life's values and godly values. How important must that be? I just want to briefly share some comments that I read in this book the other day. So bear with me here. These are good comments here. And as I say, I hope it whets your appetite that you might think, well, I might get that book. Or a couple of you might think, I'll get the book and we'll share it, whatever. Because it's really, really good to have this sort of book. Here are a few quotes. Mentoring has to do with giving advice, of encouragement and accountability. Of course, in my mentoring, I do give some advice. I do give suggestions because, you know, I mentor people about 20 years younger than I am, and I dare say they haven't learned quite as many things that I have along life's pathway. I mean, that goes with it, you know, without saying, doesn't it? And so there is quite a bit of advice or suggestions. I like to call it suggestions. I just, you know, suggest things to them. And if you've got the right sort of mentoree, they'll take it on board. They'll take it on board and it'll make a difference in their life. Encouragement. I tell you what, I find number one word in mentoring is encouragement with a big E. If you are not an encourager in any way, I'd like to say you've probably got to let God do a little bit of work in your life before you'll ever make a good mentor. Does that go without saying? You must incorporate loads of encouragement when you mentor anybody. And accountability, because the mentoree is accountable to you as a mentor. That doesn't mean to say they tell you everything that goes on in life, not at all, but there's that accountability. We see so little of that in our society, don't we? And everyone does what they think is right in his or her own eyes. Well, I don't think we're doing well as a society because of that. But the mentoree has an accountability, a measure of accountability to the mentor. Here's another quote. Mentoring is not limited to a person's spiritual life. Now you see, discipling in the instructional way is limited to the spiritual life. You understand that. But mentoring is not limited only to that. The influence of a mentor tends to affect areas of life beyond the personal and the religious, far beyond just the spiritual. And that's, I think, one of the great power of mentoring. It is always pointing the mentoree to Christ and that godliness of life, that holiness of life. It's always that. It's always Christ-centred. But it's a lot of other things. See, I can think over the years, I've mentored people who haven't a clue how to have a workable marriage. Haven't a clue. Now, I always say, I am not a marriage counsellor. I would never get into that. I just think, I don't know how marriage counsellors do it and stay sane with all the problems that people have in marriages. But if I, as an older person and a mentor, can't give some sort of advice to a young married person, well, there's something wrong with me. And I tell you what, they will ask you whether you want them to or not. So you have to be ready to help people, young people, newly married or whatever, and they struggle. And to be able to just come alongside and give some advice in that whole area. I've had people they've lost boyfriends or whatever, and the pain of that, and I almost forget what that's like. I did go through that. I think I did. Yes, I did. When I was about 20, I do remember some guy. It wasn't Ian. But you know what I mean? This is life, isn't it? This is life. And that's painful. And they will most likely, if you're their mentor, they will want to talk to you about what they're going through at this time. And you don't say, oh, well, come on, get it together. You'll go through a few more breakdowns before you know you'll get the right one. Obviously, that is not what I call encouraging. So you come alongside and you encourage, you listen. A mentor listens, is a good listener, as well as giving the advice and encouragement. You listen to people. I've been amazed at what mentorees have shared with me. And some have said they haven't shared it with another soul. And I think, wow. Now, I am positive that's got nothing to do with me. It's all to do with mentoring. Because there are some things you just don't want to go home and tell mum and dad, or you don't want to go and tell your husband or your wife or your best friend even. But there's safety, well, there ought to be, with the mentor. Do you understand? And so I've talked about all manner of things with younger women. Sometimes I think, oh God, no, this is too much. I don't know how I'm going to handle this. And I always have these little SOSs while the mentor is speaking to me. God, wisdom. I was mentoring someone today, and she was just starting to share, and she said, I don't know what you think about this. And immediately, she doesn't know this. Lord, your wisdom. I can sort of see this will be a Bobby Dazzler coming up. Well, it wasn't that bad at all, but still. I still need, I need wisdom. You will need wisdom beyond your own wisdom, I can assure you of that. And God is so faithful as you totally depend on Him to give you the necessary wisdom and skills to effectively mentor another person. Mentoring focuses on relationships. It's very relational. And there again, if you're not a people person in any way, I'm not sure that you're going to make a good mentor. As a matter of fact, I think you would have to do a lot of work. But it is relational. And it involves older people and younger people relating in such a way that younger people grow as the older people guide. Don't you like that? These are quotes from this book. It involves both older people and younger people relating together in such a way that younger people grow and the older people guide. See, isn't that simple to understand? The mentoree or the proteges, that's another word for mentoree, they're growing in all areas of life. While you as the older, doesn't mean they have to be old, you guide. You're just guiding them, coaching. There's all sorts of words you can use instead of mentoring. There's another thing here, a mentor models life. Now, one of the main things in mentoring is modelling. You model life. And you help in many areas such as discipline, encouragement, a calling to accountability. All those areas and more. And as I said, it's all in that book if you want to read that. One interesting thing I read, and it didn't surprise me, but we really need to get a hold of this. A mentor, I tell you what a mentor is not. A mentor is not a critic. So if you sort of think, oh, well, I know someone, just say you're a young person here and you're thinking of someone, they're 10 years, 20 years older than you, whatever, and you think, I wonder if they'd be good at mentoring me. But then you know that they're very critical and they never encourage anyone. Well, I would suggest you don't even try that person. A mentor is not a critic, but someone who gets alongside a person and encourages them in all sorts of areas of life. A mentor is one who believes in the person they're mentoring and one who sees potential. That is most important. You must believe in your mentoree and you must see potential in them. And I've read stories, lots of stories, and even in my own mentoring over the years, the Lord has taught me, Diane, don't look at just what you see in front of you now. This young person, I can think of someone who was just a few years a Christian. She'd had a bit of a screwed up life, to say the least, was finding difficulties in a marriage, etc., etc. And it was like the Lord just said, Diane, don't look at her as you see her now, but look at the potential, and with a little bit of coming alongside and encouraging, mentoring, you just see what she can be in the future. And I tell you what, I do that with everyone I mentor now. I see the potential in them and I encourage them in it, because, you know, a lot of people I find, and this includes young people and it includes older people, suffer with low self-esteem. And I tell you what, if you suffer with low self-esteem, you will never really think you'll amount to anything. You'll never really want to try at things. You'll never really have that confidence that you need to try that new job or to try, you know, some new educational experiment or whatever. And so, you know, the mentor has this wonderful opportunity to come alongside that particular person and say, hey, I can think of someone I used to say, listen, I don't care what your past has been, what I meant by that, because she used to say, well, Diane, it's hopeless for me. I'll never amount to anything. I'll never be able to impact anyone in my world because I'm all screwed up from my past. And I used to say to her, look, I don't care what your past is. You live from today onwards and you now know the Lord, and God and you can do anything. And she used to look at me. I'll never forget this young married woman, who at 16 had her first child, not married, and from then on, her life was all screwed up, I'm telling you. Nice woman when I met her. She still is a nice woman. That sounded good, didn't it? She still is nice. But you know, she had so much baggage there, and she really didn't think she would amount to anything. And so I just say, no, listen, I'm not going to cope with all that talk about, you know, that you're no good and all the rest. I won't. if anyone knows me, and if anyone comes to me and, they can't do this and they're no good and their father said they'd never amount to anything, I've heard it all. I just won't take it. I said, listen, we're going to talk about this. We're just going to talk about it because God can do wonders in your life. You let him, and you just see, and then he can use you. Let me give you an example here. I've got 2 examples here before I go on to letting you fill out the how to go about mentoring. I met this young woman some time ago, and I remember her thinking, well, actually, she was in one of my discipleship groups, because you might say, well, I don't even know how do you find these mentorees? Well, that's another subject, and even next week, hopefully we can have a little bit of question time and we can help you in that, okay? But here was one way. She was in my discipleship group, and at the end of the year, I was just praying, Lord, is there anyone in my group that I should continue to come alongside next year in a mentoring capacity one-on-one, okay? Because there's only so much you can do in a discipleship group because it's all very instructional. And I've also found that there are opportunities to have group mentoring, but only very minimal, okay? So I really prayed, and this girl was impressed upon my mind, this young married woman. She was impressed upon my mind, and I thought, oh, Lord, are you really putting her name before me? And I have these little conversations with the Lord. And but as time went on, and over the Christmas break, I still, whenever I prayed about should I mentor her, I just had this very strong impression on my heart that, yes, just ask her, Diane, just ask her. Well, what, Lord, if she says she doesn't want to be mentored by me? Just ask her. Because, any possibilities. So I asked her, January, I think, and she was rapt, and I'm thinking, wait, this is interesting. She didn't say no, she just said, oh, I would so appreciate that. And so I started to mentor her. Well, she just had such a low self-esteem and all the rest, and she didn't think she could ever amount to anything. So I started to instill in her hope, and this whole thing that in God, he can do amazing things in your life, I used to say to her. You've got a hope. And at first, I honestly don't think she believed me. Do you understand that people like that, they can't believe you, especially if they've been put down most of their growing up years? But I didn't take any notice. I just every month, I generally meet with people monthly when I'm mentoring them. And I would just go over the similar things, and new things had come up, and I'd still say, you've got to hope in God. You've got to look to Jesus. You've got to fix your eyes on Jesus. You and him can do anything. And do you know, a few weeks ago, because I haven't seen her for some time, she's moved right away and lives somewhere else now. A few weeks ago, I met her for coffee to see how she was getting on with her umpteen dozen children. She's all of 25 now, but she's got 4 children now. And she said the most beautiful thing. She said, Diane, I've never said this to you, but sometime back when you mentored me, she said, I have to tell you that I don't know where I'd be today if you hadn't have mentored me. I just looked at her. I didn't say anything. What would you say? I had no idea. Because the honest truth is, and I'm being honest, sometimes when I come away from mentoring someone, I'm saying, Lord, I don't know if that meant anything to them or not, but I have to trust you. Isn't life all about a trust? Particularly when you're impacting people. Sometimes I think, well, I suppose it was helpful, but then I don't really know. And sometimes, depending on what you're talking about, you might really think, oh goodness, I hope that was all right. I suppose it was, but well, Lord, it's all in your hands anyway. I did it as unto you. But this, as I said, this young woman after all this time said, she doesn't know where she'd be today if I hadn't have mentored her. And one of the most exciting things she said to me, and she's, as I said, she's all of about 25 now, 25, 26. She said, guess what? You've taught me to reach out to others, Diane. And so in a sort of a way, she said, I don't know what you call it, but I think it's sort of mentoring. And I said, why? What are you doing? She said, this 16-year-old girl at our church, she's from a broken family. She, really has had a tough life. She feels unloved, da-da-da, da-da-da. And I said, yes, and what are you doing? Because, this woman I'm talking about is 10 years older than this girl. She said, well, you know what? I've just taken her under my wing. I invite her home for meals. She loves the kids and she plays with them. And she loves skiing. My husband and I, when we go skiing sometimes on the weekend, we let her come along and she's just watching us. And you might say, oh, that's not mentoring. Well, I can assure you that is mentoring. It may not be the big stuff that Howard Hendricks might be into, but hey, this girl, how she's been impacted, she wants to make a difference in some 16-year-old girl's life whose low self-esteem is as low as it can be, who has had no chance in life. Do you understand that God is now using this girl that I mentored to, in her own way, mentor this 16-year-old? And I feel like a grandma mentor, if you understand what I'm saying. But isn't that what it's about? You know what I read in this book at the beginning? Someone who was talking about Howard Hendricks said he has mentored thousands of people. That's not the end of the sentence, because how could you mentor thousands? He has mentored thousands through multiplication. Don't you love it? I love it. And I prayed when I read that, Lord, I ask today, this was the other day, that you will in some way cause me to be able to mentor. I didn't have the faith to say thousands, so I said dozens and dozens through multiplication. Don't you reckon? Oh, I think, oh God, if I could only impact more people like this young woman who then, she got a hold of what I was trying to do. She wants to make a difference in someone else's life. I think it's wonderful. Let me just share with you one other story, and then I'll just get you to fill in those 8 points there. One young woman that I've mentored, this is what she wrote at the end of the year. Now, I'm just sharing this with you to give you an idea of what value mentoring can have. Are you with me? Just the value when at times I think, well, it's pretty simple. I either have them at home if others are out, or I go to my cafes. That's a favourite place of mine for mentoring. The other night, I was mentoring someone after work, and we went to my cafes, and it was, I don't know, I think all of Albany Creek High was there. So I said, oh, this is no good. So we went to KFC, never done a KFC mentoring, but there's always a first for everything. Who cares? It was quiet, we got coffee, no one bothered us, so no one worried about us. But this young woman, this is what she said one time, and she wrote this card. She said, I am forever grateful for your influence on my life, for your wisdom and support have been such a blessing and have helped me so much this year in what has been a busy decision-making year. Because you see, they could be making huge decisions and you think, oh goodness, well, what am I going to do about that? I tell you what, you just cry out to the Lord really quickly and ask for wisdom, a whole lot of wisdom, if they're going to ask you what should they do in this area. She said, I have enjoyed and valued our time together so much, and thank you for so willingly sacrificing your time. Remember, I said it will cost. both discipling and mentoring, it'll cost your time, your energy, all sorts of things. Might cost you the price of a cup of coffee, that's no big deal, whatever. And she said, your words have often been clearly imprinted on my mind and have helped me seek God's direction. Bless you so much. You see, I get really encouraged because here's a young woman with all of life ahead of her, and just through a little mentoring, I never find it hard. But you've got to give time. But I don't find it hard, and the more you do it, like with anything, it just becomes more natural. At first I used to be a little bit scared, but now it comes more natural. But to think that even some things that were said unbeknownst to me has helped her to seek God's direction in her life much more than she was before. And I think it's worth it, you know. It is really worth it. And you don't have to be any Howard Hendricks or John Mallison. You can be like this young woman that I mentored, and in her own way, she's impacting a 16-year-old. Now, of course, the more mature you are, the more you'll have to offer. Does that not go without saying? But I tell you what, if you're willing and you've got that way about you to encourage, to relate with people, anything's possible in God. Now, I just want you to turn to, suppose you've got page 15 here, and we'll finish up with this. How to disciple or mentor others. Have you got that? The first one starts with P. Can you please tell me what could that possibly be? Pray. Pray about it. Now, there's not a lot to say about that except surely it goes without saying to pray about it. And I shared with you how I really had this name of this young girl upon my heart, and it kept coming back, and I kept saying, Lord, are you trying to tell me something? I remember another one that I actually mentor now. She'd been to our home with a lot of the young people. Sometimes young people come to our home, and I'd seen her over the time. And through that, I just thought, perhaps you should mentor her. So then I say, Lord, is this my own idea, or is this coming from you? And I'd go on a few more weeks, but things would happen and she'd be sort of in my pathway, and I'm thinking, I think it's getting through my thick head. Diane, ask her. It's the way of the Lord just prompting you to go and ask that person. And when I asked her, she said she'd been praying for a mentor for ages, and she was so excited. I couldn't believe it, because I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a big deal, but obviously it was to her. And she's been forever grateful for that opportunity. So, you know, you really have to pray about it and then see who God impresses upon your heart. I went and told you the answer. You would have known that, wouldn't you? Yeah, see, Chris said she'd know it. Choose carefully. Okay? I tell you one way you can choose. Actually, I got this out of the book, and it's something that I've done anyway, but I thought it was cool the way Hendrik says it. Just take them out for a cup of coffee first. Okay? Don't say anything about mentoring. And I remember not long ago, I just thought about a person, and I thought, I wonder if I should mentor them. They'd been in my discipleship group at some point, and I wondered if I should get with them one-on-one. So I prayed, but I wasn't sure, so I went out for a cup of coffee, and guess what? At the end of that time, I just felt to let it go. That's all right. I just didn't feel like I normally feel, that strong impression to ask them. Do you know what I mean? So that's all right. I see you from time to time just as a friend, but I just didn't feel. There's just like the Lord just saying, no, just leave that one, Diane. So you don't have to go and mentor everyone that you come across. That's for sure. As a matter of fact, as I said, most of us would probably cope with no more than one a year. I do cope with more than that, but that's because of my wonderful age, and I do have more opportunity than I did some years ago. Not everyone who wants to be mentored should be mentored. I remember a girl some years back, and she obviously wanted for me to mentor her. So I went and visited her and had a talk. And I tell you what she wasn't, is what I'm going to tell you, how you choose a person. They must be responsive and teachable. They must be responsive to you as a person. There must be that rapport. You won't be able to, like, even if I were to say I'd have a go at mentoring everyone in that room, I'm sure that wouldn't work. Well, for a start, some of you are older than I am, so that wouldn't work for a start. But you've got to have a rapport, and you've got to, feel as though both of you are connecting. Does that make sense? There's got to be a connection. But this particular girl, and I could tell she was wanting me to sort of spend time with her in the mentoring area. I didn't feel happy at all. And one of the main things in the 2 hours I had with her, she knew it all. She was that sort of, she's young enough to be my child. She knew it all. She didn't really know it all, but you know what I mean? That sort of person. She wasn't teachable. I'd sort of suggest something and she'd just sort of come over it and say, what she knew. And I'm thinking, oh, well. See, some people, you cannot mentor them. Just leave them. Just leave them. Number 3, something is the key. What is it? Okay, one of the main things that a mentor does is, someone said it, modelling. Modelling is the key. You've got to be a good role model. And not perfect. I mean, I tell you what, if you read any of these books, and I know it for a start, a mentor is not perfect. And I often say to my mentorees when I'm starting out, I say, listen, I don't know it all. I'm not perfect. And I tell you what, I'm not God. So, I don't know it all. And I will always point you to the Lord. But if I can help you in some little way, I'll do that. It's very important to know that, no, you don't have to be perfect, but you have to be a good role model. Doesn't that go without saying? Because they're going to model you. They're going to model you whether you like it or not. Let them observe your life. Share how you deal with the good times and the bad times. Be real. That's most important, be real. And I know I was talking to someone today in the mentoring area, and she was going through a particularly difficult time. I said, listen, let me share with you how I went through a difficult time, 30 years ago, but similar. And I, struggled here, and she's just looking at me, but you see, that's how they learn. You've struggled, you still do. I tell people, I still struggle with all manner of things. Hey, wait a minute, we're still growing. I'm still growing. I'm on a journey. But if I can offer something to the younger person and help them perhaps to get there a little quicker than I did, because remember, I was not mentored. I wish I was mentored, but I wasn't. But hey, mentor someone and help them to, get there a little bit quicker along life's journey with less struggle than you and I had to put up with. So be real. Number 4, not just formal, but I better tell you that one. Informal. Yeah, just informal. In other words, building a good relationship. Invite them to your home. Let them see that, you're real. And Ian, one of the guys that he has mentored, he often plays tennis with him, and on the way home, then he'll do a little bit of, just talking. The guy, I don't know, I think one time he had problems with a girl that he was going with. You can't imagine why a young guy would have problems with girl relationships, but they do. And so he just shared with Ian, and this is after a game of tennis, be informal as well as formal. And if you're not into tennis like I'm not, there are other ways. And as I say, I just sometimes go out and have a nice morning tea somewhere and just be real. Number 5, keep the focus on, I'm going to have to give this to you, I think. Spiritual formation. Keep the focus on spiritual formation. Influence them to follow Christ more closely, being transformed increasingly into his likeness. And I think I said before, it has to be Christ-centered mentoring. You don't have to do a Bible study, but you see what I'm saying? It has to be Christ-centered mentoring. And I, time and time again, point my mentorees to trust in the Lord no matter what their story is, and to get into the Word of God and to spend time in his presence, all that and more. I don't do that every time I see them, but it comes through. It comes through, and it has to. 6, aim for something dependency, not mentor dependency. Yes, Christ or God dependency, whatever. Encourage them to be dependent on God, and that's one thing I'm very careful to do. Don't ever end up with a sort of a leech-like situation where they are so dependent upon you and almost sucking your blood, so to speak, if you use the leech illustration. Get them to grow in their trust, their faith in God, not to be dependent on you. You're just there to just guide them along the way, but you're not God, and you never will be, and you don't want to be. And at the end of the time of mentoring, you can leave them and they're not just thinking, oh, I'm falling apart, I haven't got my mentor. You should never cause that sort of dependency. Do you understand? 7, encourage areas of gift. What? Oh, well, yeah, that could be a one. That could be. I guess in this one, I think you might have got it from one of the books, did you? Gifting, anyway. Encourage areas of gifting. But yeah, you can encourage them in every area, actually, doubt included. But this is just a particular one in the areas of gifting. Let them know they're unique, and that, guess what? Their gifting and calling is probably very different to yours as the mentor, and that's actually can be very good. You know, I think most people I've mentored, they're not like me in all sorts of areas. That's good, because God has uniquely made them, encouraged them to develop into all that God has for them. But not to think, oh, if I'm not like my mentor, guess perhaps I'm not doing it right. That's not the truth. See them as unique beings and encourage them. And number 8, know when to release them. 6 months to a year, I normally mentor for about a year, once a month. There are all different ways. I've known of busy businessmen who've met with a young protege for an hour over lunch once a week or once every fortnight. You know, during the lunch hour if they work in the same vicinity. Look, anything's possible. But sometimes people will even mentor for over a year. I don't normally. Occasionally I will. But make sure there's some break-off point. Because I tell you what, there are a lot of other people out there that would value your mentoring, and the mentoree needs to stand on their own 2 feet, and you need to encourage them to look out for someone that they can mentor. Let me just close with this one sentence, again from Hendrick's book. I, the mentoree, happen to be someone who's... Oh, wait a minute. Look for a mentoree whose heart and life have been prepared by God to receive the unique contribution that you have to make as a mentor, and your interaction will have been not simply worthwhile, but invaluable. See, if you really look for someone whose heart and life God has prepared beforehand for your unique contribution as a mentor, then anything you have to do in that mentoring area with that person, it won't be just worthwhile, but it will be invaluable. And I say amen to that. So I just encourage you, there are lots of areas, but that'll just give you just a wee taste in the whole mentoring area.
Well, thank you, Diane, for sharing those very practical areas and encouragement to all of us, I'm sure. Well, just in our closing time tonight, we're just going to break into our little groups of 3 and give those of you who have prepared tonight an opportunity just to work through that study, My First Step, Study 11. What we're trying to do by giving you this opportunity, in this whole mentoring area, you know, the best place to begin is in the discipling area. Start discipling somebody because you've got the tracks to run on. And as you get more confident in that area, building a solid foundation, then you can move on into the mentoring area across the scale a little bit more.